first thing I'd like to say in my sermon this morning is thank you for coming back. Those of you who were here last week, I was wondering whether you were, because the sermon last week was a tough one, and it was a lot of sort of, we could call them war stories from the trenches. Some of the really awful things that can happen in the church. I think it's important that we tell the truth. I think sometimes in our life we get used to, putting a coat of gloss paint over things that really need to be exposed. Unless we expose the rot, the ship will sink. You can cover it up as much as you want, but if the rot's in the wood, no matter how much you cover it up, it's going to show. And so I think if the church is to proceed towards greater health than it presently enjoys, it will be because we have the courage to be honest. And when we're honest about the church, we can gloss it up any way we want, but we're not talking about just an empty institution. We're not talking about pages in a book. We're talking about people. And so if the church is to be what Jesus wants the church to be, it will be because the people in the church are on a journey towards becoming more and more of what God wants us to be. None of us are perfect. None of us will be this side of the grave. But we can embrace the journey that God calls us to be on, or not. We can choose to leave and basically say, I'm just not interested. If a person actually thinks through the substance of faith and theology and actually works it through and then decides that they really don't want anything to do with it, I can respect that. What I don't respect is people who don't do the work and just basically make absolutist statements about the church that just don't hold water and are pretty thoughtless. Like, how can anyone believe that? Well, there's all sorts of reasons why people can believe that. And for somebody to say, how can anyone believe that, means that they haven't done walking. It goes on and on and on. And I could basically fill a whole sermon talking about things like that, but I don't want to. I want to move on very rapidly. When we look at the future of the church, and I assume because you're here this morning on a relatively nice weather day so far, and you could be doing anything else. You could be out, having breakfast at Cosmopolitan and sending the bill to St. Mary's. You can't do that. But you could be doing anything else. You've got a level of commitment to what church stands for. And I will hope and assume a level of commitment to what the church can become. I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about the world we're living in, but it seems that whenever I'm preparing this type of sermon, some disaster happens, some horrific thing happens that I would feel badly if I didn't refer to. And of course, I'm sure you're there ahead of me. What happened in Carolina, with a person who is committed apparently to white supremacy, going into a church and actually sitting down at a Bible study with a group of people, and then killing 9 of them. I don't understand. I don't understand how a person's mind works that would, in any way, even as a white supremacist, cause them to think that somehow that will serve any good, anyone's good. I don't understand it. I don't know what would make me understand it. What I can understand is what happened, I forget exactly where it was now, somewhere in Europe, where a young man, it seems he was 26 or something, drove his car at over 100 kilometers an hour into a crowd of people, killing 3 of them. And when he was arrested, the police said, he is unbalanced. Really? You drive your car at high speed into a crowd of people, and somebody, obviously a higher education, says this person is unbalanced. No kidding. Well, you put one up against the other. I haven't heard the term unbalanced used to describe what the guy did in Carolina. But may I suggest that there is a lot in our society that is unbalanced, not only in terms of personal behavior, but in terms of corporate behavior. We are getting more and more tribal in our society. And it's not growing up what I learned, as a child of the late 60s and 70s, it was naive, it was pie in the sky, it was silly, it was stoned, but it was peace, love, and everybody love everybody, and embrace everybody. Sure, it was naive. Sure, it wasn't going to work. But at least the words were good. The words were good. And now we've got increasing tribalism. One thing in all this reporting of what went on in that church that bothers me, I can't even articulate fully why it bothers me, but why it bothers me that this was a black church. It bothers me that there were black churches and white churches, and I don't know, there's other types of churches too. Don't want to go through the whole list, but there's different types of churches. Isn't it supposed to be like one body in Christ? There is neither male nor female, Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, but Christ is all and in all. Isn't that what we're shooting for? So it bothers me, this tribalism. And it seems to me that the message of Christ is counter-tribalism. When you look at who he selected as his followers, you see him breaking just about every social convention that existed. Of course, look what happened to Jesus. And if you sort of follow his line, in one way or another, the same might happen to us, in one way or another. But he just chose what a collective group of people. If you were to say, what was Jesus' tribe? Like we know he was a Jew, but when he put the band together, and the disciples, and then 72, and then the 120, and who was his tribe? Well, his tribe is the world, and our tribe is supposed to be the world. So how do we do that as church? How do we make the world our tribe, and make, I don't use that word here, not make the world understand, but present, this is good, present, this is the way to say it, present such an image of the kingdom here on earth that people say, yep, that's a tribe worth belonging to. Sort of a counter-tribe almost. In order to do this, there's a couple of things that I think are prerequisites. One I think is honesty, and the stories that I told last week were along that, and this week too. The second thing I'd like to say is faith. There needs to be faith within the church, and there isn't always faith within the church. A kid was once asked, how do you define faith? What's faith? Faith is believing in something you know isn't true. That's not what faith is. It's a cute definition, and it makes it into Reader's Digest quips. But faith is believing in something you know isn't true. That's not what faith is. Faith is, I have such an experience of this, that, and the other thing, that I know that this, that, and the other thing is going to be there next time. Like, for example, the van that we have. I never thought I'd be a fan of Chrysler. My dad is a Chrysler man. I've always been against Ford, just on basic principle. Just because they say found on road dead, fix or repair daily. All those things, it's just such a good quiz. You don't have any such thing for Chrysler. But my dad was a Chrysler man, so I had to be something different. I went to Toyota. But we have a Chrysler minivan. That thing is so reliable. Right now, I will bet you every cent that I'm worth, all $3.27, that if we go out after the service and Marie puts the keys in, because I'm not driving anymore, and goes to start it, guarantee you that thing will start. I have faith. Why are you laughing, Walter? Do you have problems with your car?
I got rid of a Chrysler.
Well, you should repent. I have faith that it's because all my experience of that thing is that it is incredibly reliable. It's not perfect, but it's incredibly reliable. And that's what faith is like. You have such an experience of the presence of God in your life, and you can look back over your life, and perhaps in some dramatic ways, but for a lot of us more subtly. Some of it's a combination of dramatic and subtle. We look back on our lives, and you say, I didn't see it at the time, but now looking back, I can see that somehow I was being directed. We may not like to use theological language like, God was leading me. That sounds so holy, doesn't it? God was leading me. But that's really what we mean. Some people are comfortable saying that. Great. As long as it's authentic, say it. But there's something, this guy. That's what faith is about. The church needs faith. I want to tell you a story about faith. when I went to St. Margaret's in Massachusetts, there were a lot of lovely people there, very hard workers, and we did some really remarkable things for the time, for the history of the diocese. It was wonderful. Not perfect, but wonderful. And one of the things that I inherited from my predecessor was a lay reader. And when in fact I inherited several, but one in particular, people said, oh, when he does the service, boy, it's good. And his sermons, And I had to meet this guy because I was there a couple of weeks and I hadn't met him, so I called him up and arranged for a visit. And I dropped in on his house, and he said, well, I'm glad you called me because I've been meaning to call you. And so we had a very pleasant chat about Massachusetts, and about St. Margaret's Church, and about some of the lovely people. And then he brought it around to that he was going to be given the change in ministry and leadership and stuff. He was going to use this as an opportunity to stop being a lay reader. Now, we'd never met before, so he hadn't had enough experience of me to not like me yet. So it had to be something else. And so I figured there's some story there. So he's talking on one hand about how wonderful the church is, but on the other hand, how he's stepping back as a lay reader. And that, to me, that's dissonance. Like, those two don't fit together. So I want to know why, And so I asked him why. And you know what? If you ask people why, usually they are willing to talk. And he said, well, I got to tell you the truth. Now, when somebody says, I'm going to tell you the truth, sometimes I'm tempted to say, why? Should I normally assume you're lying? And you're going to make an exception to your rule and tell me the truth? But, of course, being a sophisticated, wise, mature, and good-looking individual, I would never say, well, I was 7 then, so it's different. I wasn't going to say that. I just let him talk. He says, he grew up as a machinist, in a mill, in the rail industry. Some of you will remember the Angus yards, Angus shops. He was a machinist, and obviously a very intelligent person. And he climbed the ranks, and he ended up finding himself in management at one point, and deservedly so. And in management, he had to make presentations and reports and give talks and stuff like that. And that not being his upbringing, he found himself incredibly nervous in doing a really bad job. So he knew that he needed practice and opportunities for public speaking. And where do you have an opportunity for public speaking? The church. And so the best way to take advantage of the opportunity for public speaking in the church is to become a lay reader. And so that's what he did. And so he went through all the lay reader training and learned how to do morning prayer services and learned how to lead worship and all the rest of it, to the point where people thought he was really, really wonderful, and I'm sure he was. And he even preached sermons. But then he said to me, but I've just got to tell you, he says, I don't believe. He didn't say believe, he says, I don't have faith. And we talked about that for a little while. And I raised the question of the sermons that people thought were so uplifting and edifying. And to tell you how old this story is, he said to me, I buy them. There are places where you could go to buy sermons. Now we get them online free if you want to. But in those days, there were actually places where you could go, still are, where you can buy sermons. And so the words that he was preaching on a Sunday morning were not his own. They were words, very good words, that he had purchased. And so we talked, and we parted friends. But I assured him that I felt that his decision was the right one, to not be a lay reader. But that I hoped that he was open to the possibility that maybe there was more to this church than he presently experienced. I said that with less maturity and less, I don't know what, not as well as I should have. But we remained friends for the years that he remained in the parish. He ended up moving. But a lovely man, and a lovely family too. And they used to come every Christmas. Every Christmas. And we would smile at each other, and we would shake hands and wish each other Merry Christmas. And he would give a significant financial contribution to the parish because he thought that in a time when the province of Quebec was getting increasingly French, St. Margaret's should continue to exist, and it was an English church. And so he wanted to make sure that it didn't go broken close. He was not thrilled when I started doing French services, but nonetheless, he was pleased that St. Margaret's was still open. See, if the church was to be led by people who perhaps are of superb intellect, great education, acute theological understanding, tremendous trained pastoral ability and all the rest of it, but without faith, the church would be dead. And if it wasn't dead, it should be dead. Because the church isn't about the skills. The skills are to accomplish God's purpose. And God's purpose is spreading the good news, the message of the good news. Okay, that's phase one of the sermon. Phase two is this. Further to that, I'm convinced that it is a time of tremendous opportunity for the church, not just St. Mary's, but the church as a whole. We have been through a very interesting century called the 20th century. We're into the 21st century. We know that everything changes on a dime. There is a graph that I saw a while ago, and it really enlightened me to actually see it presented graphically, how the pace of change outpaces the pace of learning by about 8 to 1. So things are changing about 8 times faster than we can cope with the change. We invent answers to problems 8 times ago. We haven't figured out the answer to how do you limit your adolescent's access to internet porn. How do you get Miley Cyrus to put some clothes on? It goes on and on and on. That's just 2. Perhaps that's just cheap shots. How do we get integrity in government? It will go on and on and on. How do we teach people that relationships aren't consumable like the cottage cheese that you bought at Provico last week? That relationships are more significant than that. How do you teach people that people aren't just objects for your utilization, but that should be treated like thou, like you would treat Jesus himself if he was in your presence? And the pace of change in how we're living, apparently, outpaces our pace of learning by 8 to 1. I didn't invent that. I didn't read it from a credible source. So into this context, the church is called to proclaim God's message. So how do we do it? Can I say something that's a duh, and I don't mean to patronize or insult you, but I just want to put it down there. We're not doing so good right now. We're not doing it so good right now. One of the other things I learned a long time ago was any institution will either grow or shrink to the size it wants to be. Isn't that interesting? Any institution will either grow or shrink to the size that it wants to be. And one of the examples that was given was the Canadian Legion. There was a rule in the Canadian Legion, it has since changed, but you had to be a veteran to be a member of the Legion. You know what's going to happen if that was to remain a rule. You're guaranteeing, the extinction of the Legion. Unless we have a really, really big war, there won't be enough vets for the Legion to continue. And there are numerous branches that close out. This is something that could be a much longer argument, but you get the point. The YMCA is another example. The Young Men's Christian Organization. Okay? The YMCA had to reinvent itself and continue to reinvent itself in order to continue to exist and continue to serve. Every institution is like that, including the church. The church has to reinvent itself. Now, the Y is still committed to fitness. The Legion is still committed to the principles that it was founded on, and wonderfully so. But you got to change the way you do what you do, otherwise you guarantee your extinction. The church has to change what it is doing, the way it is doing what it's doing, in order to guarantee its future. And I believe that this is a godly challenge. And the reason I'll say that, and I can go on for this, like this was a hard part of the sermon to reduce to 3 minutes, is just look at the life of Jesus. Look at God, the opportunist, in a positive way. You've got the Romans, you've got trade routes, you've got land routes and water routes that have never existed before. And this is the context into which God sends his Son to be our Savior. Where for the first time in human history, within a century, the gospel could have been spread to the then most sophisticated and well, I could just keep on adding superlatives, the civilized world. No other time in human history could that have happened until then. That is the time God chose. God uses the opportunities that present themselves. Will the church. So what does God want us to do? You know, the message that Jesus had was fundamentally the same message that was in the Old Testament. The same message about God the Creator, the same call to proper stewardship of creation, same call to proper relationships, the same call against idolatry and evil and all the rest of it. It was worded differently, but let's face it, when Jesus was asked, you know, Jesus, make it simple. You know, we're kind of thick. Make it simple, just so we understand. You know, what's the law all about? You know, Jesus, well, it's this. Love God, love your neighbor. That's it. You know, love God, love your neighbor. Get that right, and that is the completion of what's in the law and the prophets. Okay, so the New Testament, on the one hand, it's new, but on the other hand, it's a new presentation of what is eternally true. You know, there's nothing, it's not that God said, oh, I made a mistake, so help me me. That's so help me God. And I've got to start over, because all this stuff that I've been saying about caring for each other and not killing each other, and, you know, that doesn't seem to be working, so, oh, well, let's go for survival of the fittest. You know, you don't see that. You know, you see God changing the delivery method. Oh, does that sound like I'm cheapening Jesus? Change the delivery method. Well, let's bring it up to the church then, because it's a lot easier to say. You know, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, the delivery method was plunk down a church, build a bunch of bricks and mortar, or in the case of St. Mary's, I'm not sure what you built, but you know, it's build a place, and sort of like Field of Dreams, which is a movie that I love. If you build it, they will come. You know, and that's what it was. That's what it was. You build a church, and people would come. That's not it now. People are all in tune with identifying their needs and getting their needs met, and getting into their inner self, and you know, all the rest. And so, even though the message of the gospel is the same, I've got to tell you, you plunk a church right into the middle of Beaudroy, and I guarantee it won't be full next Sunday. It won't. Even though Beaudroy, well, it's gotten pretty densely populated the past few years. So what happens? Oh, just because of a brief conversation Marie and I had in the car about schools and schools closing and all the rest of it, without naming any schools, schools have to look at the same issue, by the way, if they're to survive. More and more schools that are doing well is because they're specializing in something, be it computers or the French program that they have, or art or music, whatever. Successful schools tend to be good at most, but exceptional in some. We need to learn from them. More and more schools will be closed. So what do we do? Well, one thing that I'd like to suggest for the church is something that is just so obvious as to be almost insulting to say it. It's this: go where the people are. You know, if the people aren't coming to us, we go where the people are. In Kirkland Day and Novalis and Shadow Royal, that's good, but that's not going to bring people into the church as the body of Christ. And I'm not talking about just bringing people in to fill the pews, but for the power that's represented by that. Go where the people are. That is what we did when we started Evergreen up in Saint Lazare. We went where the people were, or rather, the first I went where the people were. And there's another biblical line that I'll throw at you. This is your Bible study test. At a certain point, we are told to be wise as what? Walter? Come on, I thought you'd shout it out. Wise as serpents. And gentle as doves. He's wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. You know? We've got to be wise. There's nothing anti-intellectual about Christianity. There's nothing anti-intellectual about church. Be wise. If you want to know where God wants us, look at what's happening around us. Look at what's happening around us. And maybe even do like a conversity theorem. Posit something that is absurd. God does not want us to start a ministry in Vaudreuil. That's a conversity theorem. And then try to prove that theorem based on what God has said in the past. You can't, because it contradicts everything that God says. Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2 to the local towns and villages for training. Go and knock on their doors, and when they answer, peace them. And if your peace rests, great. If it doesn't, go somewhere else. Jesus doesn't say give up wine and go home and say everybody's against the church. That's not what he says. If they say no, go somewhere else. Because somewhere else will receive you. Go where the people receive you. They came back saying, Jesus, it's amazing. You're not going to believe it. Can you imagine saying that to Jesus? Jesus, you're not going to believe it. Of course, who do you think created it? Even the demons obey us in your name. Wow. Isn't that spectacular? And then Jesus said, okay, that was lesson 1. You know what lesson 2 is? Lesson 2 is go into the whole world. Forget your neighborhood. You know, your neighborhood's done. And people have responded, yes or no. And those who have responded, great. Those who haven't responded, another time, maybe. Go into the whole world. Go as far as St. Lazare, or maybe even Rigaud. But certainly Vaudreuil, you could practically walk to Vaudreuil. My scooter would make it to Vaudreuil practically. And Chalmont, go into Vaudreuil. I'm just using that as one example. And Chalmont. But then when Jesus is telling us that, we might say, well, Jesus, you're telling us to go and Shalom Vaudreuil, but we haven't even Shalom Kirkland yet, really. And Jesus, you know what he'd say? He'd smile. I think he'd smile. I think he smiled a lot. Not in the old 19th century pictures, but I think he smiled a lot. He'd say, you may want to look at that. You may want to look at why you haven't done that. Because you know what? When the people of God pull together and become God's universal tribe and set about building the kingdom, you know what happens? The kingdom gets built. When Bishop Paul sent me to Montreal North and Mascouche in 1983, that first year they could only pay 1/4 of my salary between them and none of their diocesan obligations. And they couldn't even sustain their own buildings. Within 18 months, we were paying the full cost of me plus 7/12 of an assistant because we only had him for 7 months of the year, June on, plus paying our diocesan share expenses. The potential was there. The potential was there. And I remember one time, here's a story for you, getting pretty close to wrap up. Here's a story for you. I remember at one point wondering whether we were just going to struggle along or whether things were really going to change. And I had a few signs that there was potential and possibility. But there was one event that really made up my mind. It was a cold, wintry night. I can't remember. It was sometime between 10 o'clock at night and midnight. And we had been working in St. Margaret's Church all night. All day and all night. Putting up tongue and groove cedar paneling. You know, the 4x8 boards. Because that place had been built of cinder block, and they hadn't been insulating stuff in the cinder block holes. It was freezing. You could not heat the place. Frost would literally be on the walls in the wintertime. That had to change. So we put a whole bunch of insulation and a whole bunch of studs and started cedar stripping the whole thing. It was really nice at 45-degree angles and all the rest of it. And just about 8 o'clock, we'd done the walls. There was only one wall left. It was the back wall, the wall behind the altar. And I was thinking, boy, these guys have been here since 6 o'clock in the morning. They were used to working on housing. And they've been working all day, up ladders, down ladders, insulation. Some of you know what that's like. It was a day. And more people than I knew. And people actually brought their friends, you know, who had nothing to do with St. Margaret's. And the language back and forth, some was English, some was French. You just keep talking, and you don't even know what language you're speaking half the time. It's sort of like St. Mary's and coffee sometimes. And I remember sitting in the front pew, and I'll say this the way it was because it's just the truth. This is the day when people smoked, you know. We even smoked in church, you know. And I was sitting in the front pew of St. Margaret's Church, sitting in the pew with my feet up on the pew in front, smoking a cigarette and drinking a cup of coffee. And there was this man by the name of Gordy Passmore, who was on an 18-foot ladder, finishing off the tongue and groove cedar at the very top point of the back wall. And I was looking at that, and I was looking at the fact that not one of the day laborers had left. We were all sitting there smoking cigarettes or having pizza or McDonald's. There wasn't even Tim Hortons in St. Margaret's area at that point. And we were all there, not one person had left. And I went, you know what? This place has potential. And within a year of that, attendance had gone from an average of 17 on Sunday to over 60. And when I left, average attendance was in the 80s. And some of it was my personality, some of it was the things that I did, some of it was that people felt, for the first time in a long time, that kids were welcome in church. But it was the people. It was the people telling the story of the good stuff that was happening in St. Margaret's. That it was a fun place to be. That it was a friendly place to be. That it was a loving place to be. That when you left, you were glad you got enough to go. And I am utterly and absolutely convinced that if we were to adopt the same thing, tell the story, and if people reject it, that's okay. That's up to them. But there are people who will say, maybe, just maybe, this God stuff has something to offer to me. The church has become increasingly tribal. It's time we broke out of our tribal boundaries. Now let's pray. God, we thank you for the opportunities that you present to us. Change is never easy. Well, maybe sometimes it is, but certainly not as far as the church goes. We think of the arguments and the fights that churches have about which prayer book to use or which hymn book. Thank you that we were spared those. Which music to use, all the rest of it. God, spare us from things that divide. Create in abundance things in this place that unite us together. And give us an excitement about telling your story. First, to people that we know about and care about, family and friends and neighbors. And then just as you send the disciples into the world, send us into the world. With the good news of your kingdom. That in spite of the anxieties and stresses and strains and upsets of life, that you are there, holding, healing, caring, and that you have created a people for that purpose, to care for others. I pray for our church. I pray for our witness into the community. Pray for all the churches of our area, all of which are struggling. Pray that we would rediscover the power of your Spirit and the grace to go out in your name. Pray these prayers in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.